Hello, everyone. We're going to wait just a few moments before we start, just to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to join. Go ahead and say hello in the chat if you'd like to. We'd like to know who you are and maybe where you're joining us from or what company. We've got 176 people in so far, now up to 180. So I'll go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, HOTMA Horizons, Navigating the Landscape of LIHTC Regulations. My name is Krisann Gaiko, and I am the Senior VP of Content Strategy at Grace Hill, and I am very excited to bring you this webinar as we have just wrapped up the last of our updates to our tax credit basics with the new HOTMA changes. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all registered attendees later this week. As an attendee, you will be in listen-only mode. This will help any outside noise and just to ensure that everyone can hear our speaker without any interruptions. But if you have any questions or you want to engage, there is a little Q&A box located down at the bottom of your screen. You can just click there and type your question, and I'll be watching the chat. And we also have our wonderful Stephanie behind the scenes that is monitoring the chat. So very exciting. And if Christine, you want to move to the next slide. Just by attending our live event today, you are automatically entered into our getaway giveaway. So we will draw one grand prize winner. They will win a $2,000 Virgin Voyages cruise voucher plus $1,000 in Visa gift cards just to help get you to the port. We will draw that winner on December 20th and just in time for Christmas. So restrictions do apply. See our site for more details. So now for the good stuff, I'm going to tell you about our wonderful speaker that we have with us today, Christine Martin. She has been in the affordable housing industry for more than 23 years, spending time with both private and public sector groups. She founded Bennett Martin Consulting in 2018. She holds multiple, as you can see after her name, multiple industry certifications in every aspect of affordable housing and constantly seeks out new information on this ever-changing industry. Christine is a member of the National Association of Home Builders, HCCP Board of Governors, and the Homes on the Hill, Hilltop area of Columbus, Ohio, Advisory Board. She enjoys speaking on all aspects of affordable housing at conferences, webinars, and in small groups. She has also written several articles for various affordable housing organizations. Christine has 2 Bachelor of Arts degrees from Otterbein University. Welcome today, Christine.
Thank you very much. So, all right, here we are, HOTMA. So this couple of things I'm going to go through are just a little bit of the history of HOTMA. This is where I usually say, if you're ever in Final Jeopardy, you hope that this will be the question and you will know the answer because of this. So HOTMA actually stands for Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act of 2016. It actually amends Section 3, 8, and 16 of the U.S. Housing Act of 1937. The intention of it was to streamline administrative burdens between federal programs and private owners. The implementation of it has been delayed. So if you've been following along, let's look at the math. It was actually, the act was in 2016. We are just about to turn the calendars over to I almost said 2015, like we're going to time travel, although it does feel like time traveling sometimes. But we're about ready to go into 2025. Part of the delays are on the HUD side, and they will be the first to admit it. This has been a rather revolutionary set of changes between the methodology that we're going to be talking about today, talking about income, assets, what all happens with what we do on the tax credit program. But there are a lot of changes on the HUD side, and they not only had to change their software, but they had to change things like their model lease. They had to change their tracks guide, which is how their whole side works. That's a whole separate subject that I will say, let's be thankful we're not talking about that today. We're going to be focusing on what we need to focus on. But I will say that some of these delays have carried over to the tax credit side and some haven't. So we'll be talking about that throughout the next hour or so and what that means to us. So some of the things that have changed that affect us on the tax credit side, we have some new definitions to income and assets. We have new verification standards. We have new definitions of household members. And then we have this kind of new to us, if we will, annual adjustment factors. And we're going to be talking about what those are, what they mean to us, when they go into effect, and what we need to do, and what we need to do kind of in this, I guess, settlement period, if you will, as we're getting used to and then fully implementing HOTMA as it goes along. So some income changes that have happened. They did a lot of clarifying. And when I want to stop here, and we'll probably say again, HUD's main vehicle of telling us the rules and regulations that we follow, that the IRS adopted early on in the days of the tax credit program, are rooted in, first of all, in the 24 CFR. They go into what we talk about Part 5 definitions of income. Traditionally, we have always gone to the HUD occupancy handbook, which is known as the HUD 4350.3. For lack of a better term, I have always referred to it kind of as the HUD Bible when it comes to how do we look at income, how do we calculate income, how do we make sure that we have the right paperwork in it. And that's been used for the HUD programs and then also carried over to the tax credit program. The last time they did an overhaul or did updates to that handbook per se was back in 2013. And they knew just after they even published it that there were changes. And so for years and years, HUD has said, we'll be publishing changes to the HUD 4350.3 soon. It got to be to the point that my definition of soon was not HUD's definition of soon. And we have been kind of laying in wait for these changes. In the meantime, there have been several documents that have been published since then, and actually amendments published in the 24 CFR that affect what we do. We also have to now follow, and we'll be following, and I'll talk about kind of the implementation of that with now the HOTMA changes. But bear in mind that if you go and you look at the HUD 4350.3 that is on the HUD website, this language that we're going to talk about is not there. So we kind of have to be mindful that we are going to need to understand that we are going to look at the HUD 4350.3, but also that these other documents and these memos that have been published since affect what we do. Now, HUD will publish stuff. They've got a lot of stuff on their HUD Exchange website. Some of the things I'm going to be talking about today is exactly where they are housed. They have put together on HUD, it's actually hudexchange.info on their website. They've put a lot of helpful tools out there. So I would encourage you all to look for those. It's easy to find with a quick Google search. And I stop and say here, I'm not an employee of Google, nor any of my family. We do not receive any proceeds from Google. It's just everybody seems to understand Google. But anyway, some of the things that have happened now with what's been in HOTMA are some better definitions of things. Some of these things have now updated to where we are as far as life in 2024. If you think about the HUD 4350.3 being last updated back in 2013, if you would have started talking about things like DoorDash and Grubhub and all of these gig economy things, those were not common, if even known at that time. This is stuff that's evolved over the course of time. So the nice thing about the HOTMA guidance is that it's bringing in some of that and giving us some good guidance. And before, we were looking at the HUD 4350.3 and just trying to do the best that we could and make reasonable determinations of income or reasonable definitions of what we were seeing. So in the HOTMA, they have clarified the difference between temporary or one-time jobs. They talk about things like tax refunds or tax credit payments, economic stimulus payments, federal census, so employees of the federal census, certain gifts, non-monetary in-kind donations, and then lump sum additions such as to assets such as lottery winnings. So let me back up just a bit. In the HUD 4350.3, we were used to the term temporary or sporadic income. And I think a lot of folks struggled with what that meant. So the definitions in HOTMA give us a better time frame of that. There are some things that will be just one-time jobs that there is nothing to count. I used to give the example in classes before HOTMA came out that I used to do market research studies, and I would get paid $50 to taste coffee and give my opinion on that. That wasn't income because there was no way to predict if it would ever happen again, what the amount was. It was just they were giving me $50 for my opinion. There are also some other temporary jobs that are just going to be very finite in time and not going to be counted as far as income. I still would encourage anyone, if they're not sure of something, go ahead and count it. Or if they do feel that it truly is temporary or one time, and they are addressing something that was disclosed by an applicant or a resident, that they add a clarification record to the file indicating we're not counting this because it was a one-time thing. This isn't going to occur again. HOTMA goes on and talks about tax refunds or tax credit payments. So this is actually, we're not going to count your tax refund. That's not income. We're also, when we talk about assets, we're going to make an exclusion of that amount of that tax refund or a tax credit if it's been within that last 12 months. But we'll talk about assets a little bit later. I'll just leave that out there as a teaser. Same thing with those economic stimulus payments. Now, maybe I'd say thankfully, we have not been like we were in the years 2020 and 2021 where we were receiving those, but it addresses those, that's not to be counted as income. It goes on and specifically talks about federal census employees. So as long as the person is a temporary employee collecting data, the rule says no longer than 6 months, that we're not going to count that as income, that's just in essence kind of this temporary or one-time job. It would only be if the person was employed by the Census Bureau as a permanent or a part-time employee, but not just for the knocking on doors, interviewing folks, and that sort of thing. We talk about certain gifts. So this is kind of where I've always tried to explain it as there are folks that rely on gift income, meaning that someone is paying a bill on their behalf and there's a pattern to it. I have an applicant right now that her ex-husband pays all of her utility bills. That would be gift income. We would be counting that. Now, what's not considered as gift income are those gifts that come for birthdays, Christmas, what I call the I love you gifts. I saw this at the store, I thought of you, so I bought it for you. That's not going to be considered as income. The, oh gosh, you got all A's on your report card, have this. That's not going to be income. Now, granted, if it's someone under the age of 18, we wouldn't be counting income anyway, but I think you all understand, or hopefully understand, what I'm getting at. The other thing that they made specific to the HOTMA language was non-monetary in-kind donations. So that's a very meaty phrase there. This is talking about folks that have to rely on going to a food bank to get food, or they go to one of the churches and they get a voucher for a mattress, or they get a voucher to go to the thrift store to buy clothes. That's not going to be income, and we're not counting it. And HUD was very clear about that, kind of finally. I think a lot of us already were practicing it, but it's nice to actually have it in writing from HUD. And also, there was a lot of language about lump sum additions to assets. So lottery winnings. And we did in HUD before, in the HUD 4350.3, it does talk about lump sum additions. Now, in that inference, it used to talk about delays in payments. So if I applied for Social Security and I applied today, but I wasn't awarded for 6 months, and at that 6-month mark, they gave me a big lump sum back to the day that I applied, we were already told that we're not counting that as income, that we would just be picking up the periodic income, the monthly amount, and casting that forward over a year's time. So some of that hasn't changed, some of that has changed, and we'll be talking a little bit more about some of these lump sum things just to get an idea of what they're actually meaning these days. So a couple of other language, and we talked about gig economy a little bit, but they talk more about self-employment. And I think this is a direct answer to the fact that we have so many folks that have either a primary job or a secondary job that relies on what we have typically now called gig income. So this could be your Door Dashers, your folks do Grubhub, drawing a blank at some of the other names, but it seems like every time you turn around, there's some new delivery service. And it just went out of my mind. Isn't that horrible? The Instacart, that's what I was trying to think of. So how we calculate those. And what it did is emphasize that we look at net income, not gross. I think that there were a lot of folks that were having their applicants or their residents pull up some of those reports that come out of the apps that these folks use to track their money, and was counting that, not allowing for the fact that if I'm driving a car and delivering all over town for any of those services, I have expenses. So it talks about making accommodations for that. So asking them about this is what you grossed, what are some of your expenses, to try to get to a correct net. I think the challenge that we have, and I think this is something that we've kind of always had when we had folks that were self-employed, is I know when I was in property management, I always hoped they had been doing this business for more than a year so that we could look at a tax return, because that I could rely on that. I could rely on that Schedule C and feel good about it. But we have a lot of folks that kind of jump in every once in a while and start these new things, whether they continue to do it or not, but they don't have a tax return. So what do we do at that point? So it gives us some guidance on that again, that we are taking the best information that we can. So trying to find out what they are earning from these gig sort of jobs, and then kind of guiding them to get to that net income. I will tell you that for a lot of my applicants over the years, that's been a little bit of a foreign concept. So if they've not filed taxes or they've not filed self-employment taxes before, you may need to guide them to some of the documents provided by the IRS to help them understand. And it could be as simple as giving them a copy of the Schedule C form so that they can see some of the things that they can deduct to try to get to that net income. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that was in HOTMA: full-time dependent students with employment earnings. Now, that hasn't changed. So we still, if we have someone who's over the age of 18 and they are still a full-time dependent, we are going to only count a certain amount of their employment income up to whatever HUD deems as that. Actually, it ties back to the dependent allowance for the HUD properties that have to do rent calculations. Now, for as long as I can remember, and I am coming up on my 25th anniversary of being in affordable housing. I should probably stop telling people that because they start doing math, but it's been $480. But I will give you a little bit of teaser of something we're talking about later. As part of HOTMA, they have now said that this amount is going to be subject to an annual adjustment factor that they're going to take into consideration things like inflation. So that 480 may adjust up. And if that adjusts up for the dependent deduction on the HUD side, that's also going to change the amount of income that we would charge or that we would count towards the household's income if that situation presented. So that's something to stay tuned to. We'll talk more about that a little bit. Some income exclusions. So at this point, HUD put some language into HOTMA that talked about some things that we're not going to look at as far as income. So if someone is receiving insurance payments or settlements for personal or property losses, that's not going to be counted as income. This is new to us. So I think that we've always kind of looked at all of things and trying to catch everything possible that might be a circumstance with someone. But now this by design in HOTMA is not going to be counted as income. Amounts recovered in a civil action or settlement based on a claim of malpractice, negligence, or other breach of duty that resulted in a member of a family becoming disabled. That's not going to be counted as income. To me, that's good news, because I have a feeling that folks that are in situations like that, that money has changed significantly for them as far as their income, and then they may have increased expenses. So I think that that's great, especially on the HUD side when you're using that to calculate income for their, or calculate their rent. So some other things. Oops. Veterans aid and attendant care. So payments that are related to aid and attendance for veterans under 38 USC 1521. This is also covers home-based care for a disabled family member. That's going to be excluded as income. And then the other thing that has come up in conversation before, and I think that there were a lot of us that weren't sure how to calculate it, if we count it, if we didn't count it, how do we count it? And that's actually replacement housing gap payments. So anyone that's subjected to the Uniform Relocation Act, if they are being displaced because of either, it could be a rehab, it could be a sale, there could be lots of different things that are involved with that, where they are getting paid a certain amount of money to house other places. They may even be getting some other monies. If that was above and beyond, we used to have to count that. That is purposely now excluded. So that to me is another good thing, especially if we've boosted people out of their home for a period of time. Now we don't have to worry about counting extra income that's tied directly to that, having to make them move for something. Financial aid. I would say of all the changes in HOTMA, this is probably the one that gives me the most heartburn. This is going to feel completely different. This is something that I hope that in a couple of years, it'll be like back of our hand. So meaning that we know it, we don't even think about it. But they have changed the rules with financial aid, talked about considering if there's assistance with the unit. So we have to determine if there's public housing involved, or non-Section 8 programs versus project-based Section 8. It impacts what we look at as far as financial aid. Until now, until HOTMA takes effect, we only counted it for folks that were receiving benefit of Section 8, and then we just simply counted the amount of financial aid above the cost of tuition and mandatory fees. Easy. It's not as easy now, but again, I think this in time, this will become very routine for us. So, but right now I feel like it's almost like a flow chart. I will tell you, I had flashbacks back to 10th grade geometry class, those if-then statements. But I think, again, hopefully with repetition, this will become something that we won't even think about. We will just do. Some of the best ways that I can kind of explain this is actually, these are the examples that HUD gave us. And it talks about Roberto is a 22-year-old full-time student without dependent children. And he is living in he is a participant in Section 8. He is the head of household. He is not over the age of 23, independent children. So with this now, with the new financial aid rules, if he receives student financial assistance in excess of tuition, both from HEA and other sources, that we're going to have to look at it differently. So HEA is the Higher Education Act, in case you haven't seen that acronym or are familiar with that acronym. So his total assistance received under 479B of HEA is $12,000. That's in the form of a federal Pell Grant. And if you've worked with college students, that lots of folks have that federal Pell Grant. In his case, other student financial aid is $25,000. So the total student financial assistance, so if I add those two together, I get $37,000. Now we find out that his total tuition plus required fees and charges is $27,000. So we are going to subtract the total cost of tuition plus required fees and charges from the total amount of student financial aid assistance. So 37,000 minus 27,000 equals 10,000. So this $10,000 is going to be counted as income in this instance. I'm just going to leave this up here for just a second, so if those of you that are reading through can see it.
Christine,
Yes.
we've had a couple of questions come in the chat. Is it okay to ask them now, just so we don't
Sure.
what we're talking about? So there's two different
Sure.
ones. There's one came through in the chat that said, what if at my property we do self-certs? The only time this would be in effect is at move-in and 1 year cert. Is that correct? She says the property is not HUD.
Yes. So there again, you're at move-in, you're always going to follow, and I'm glad you brought it up. I'm glad you worded the question you did, because I want to point out a couple of different things. So always at move-in, you're going to follow whatever the regulations are. So when HOTMA takes effect, you're going to follow all the HOTMA regulations and do all of your due diligence. Now, you mentioned a 1 year recert. So here's my little tip that, and this is taking us back, when the HERA was signed into effect back in 2008, what it says is that for purposes of the tax credit program, so on the federal standards, if the property was 100% allocated to the tax credit program, meaning every single unit had to be tax credit qualified, it actually suspended the need to do income recertifications. You only did that initial certification, and then you moved on. States, however, have always been given the opportunity by the IRS to create a higher standard for things. So there are many states that said, you know, we're not good with just doing that initial and then just going on to a self-cert. We want you to do an annual recert. There are some states that never let anyone do the HERA guidance and adopt never having to do recerts. There are some states that said do one annual recert and then you can move to self-certs. There are some states that have where you do 2 years. And I think part of it is that they were concerned about fraud. They were concerned about people that presented at move-in, and then when their income was tested again, there were things that they disclosed that they hadn't disclosed when they moved in that may have made a different determination. So if you are doing a self-certification, if it's after that, you know, if you're following whether your state regulations are doing that, you're doing self-certs. If you're just allowed to do self-certs because you're a 100% property and your state says once you initially qualify, you never have to do a third party or a verified, it can all be self-certified. Self-certification is fine. I'm assuming that you're having them fill out some sort of an income and asset form, whether it's a state mandated form or it's something that your company has come up with, and that you're doing a general calculation based off the information they've provided, and then they're signing off on that. So I hope that answers your question. But I do want to point out the difference between federal regulations and then state regulations, because that's actually going to play into some of our HOTMA implementation as well. because the states can make some of their own decisions, and we as practitioners in whatever state have to abide by that state's set of rules and guidelines.
Got it. And then here's one more. IHSS income received caring for a household member in the home. There's been some confusion as to when it is excluded. Is it a family member or a household member, or both, or either, as long as they are in the same household? I hear family member and household member terms being used. Just want to confirm that is it in fact both, or if it is truly only a family member.
So that is a great question, and I do believe I can read it right from the horse's mouth. So if you can bear with me for just a second, because I think that there are some things that are just are new, or we debate. And I was joking yesterday with someone that is also a compliance manager, and how us compliance folks, we can debate for hours and days and weeks and months about things. So bear with me for just a real quick second, because I do want to make sure that okay, so state payments to allow individuals with disabilities to live at home. And this is founded in 24 CFR and I 5.609B19. I probably didn't say that correctly. There's probably someone out there that is very persnickety about that, and I do apologize. It says these payments must be made by or authorized by a state Medicaid managed care system or other state agency, includes state Medicaid managed care system, other state agency, or authorized entity, to a family member or family to enable a family member who has a disability to reside in the family's assisted unit. So it does say there that it has to be a family member in order for that to be excluded.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us pause for those questions.
Sure. So any other questions before we move on to next nuance of student financial aid? Okay. All right. Let me get into this example. So this is for an example of student financial aid assistance in a non-Section 8 programs. So Juan is a full-time student. He received the following grants and some scholarships to cover for college: federal Pell Grant, $25,000, university scholarship, $15,000, Rotary Club scholarship of $3,000. So in this instance, that total assistance received under the Higher Education Act, that's that Pell Grant, so $25,000. The total other financial assistance received, $18,000. So that's adding up the university scholarship and the Rotary Club. His actual covered costs plus required fees and charges. So if I'm looking at that, oops, I apologize. Is 28,000. I do apologize. I hadn't flipped my notes there. So step one, determine amount of actual covered costs. So $28,000 are actual covered costs minus, so we're going to subtract out the total assistance received under the Higher Education Act. That equals $3,000. Determine the amount of student assistance to include in income, $18,000. So that's other student financial assistance received minus $3,000. That's that actual covered costs exceeding that Higher Education Act assistance or the Pell Grant. That equals $15,000. So we're going to be counting as $15,000 as income for him. Now, if that number had been a negative, then we wouldn't be counting any money for him. So we do still have to do the math. We still have to figure out if there's money that we do have to count. But you can see that there's some different ways that we're doing it based on whether they are receiving Section 8 or they are in a non-Section 8 program. So again, I will be real honest with you. This is the one that I think gives me the most heartburn. But again, I think with practice will come ease, and it will be something that soon that we won't even give another nod to. We will just keep working on it, and it will all make sense. So, okay. I do want to change over and talk about assets. We have had some definitions that have been put into the guidance for us. We have some terms that may be new to us and some new implications. And then there's some other things about how we treat some things. There are some differences now. So, oops, sorry about that. So real property. So real property, that would be a house, or that would be a piece of land. Personal property. So that's just about everything else that we have. So, but here's the thing, is now HUD has said, okay, we have necessary personal property and we have non-necessary personal property. Here's another full disclosure. I will tell you, when they first started talking about this and they talked about necessary personal property are things that I need to survive. So my clothes, my furniture in my apartment, my car that I use to get to work, those are definitely necessary. Those are not going to be counted as assets. Examples of non-necessary personal property: a checking account, a savings account. If I have luxury items, so if I have a speedboat, if I have a very expensive piece of jewelry that is not something that is my wedding ring, so a wedding ring or something that has a religious or cultural significance would be considered necessary. Non-necessary would be those other than. I did joke with someone when they talked about non-necessary and they talked about checking accounts and savings accounts. I could just imagine someone saying, well, I have this account so I can pay bills, so therefore it is necessary. I appreciate that comment, but that's not how we're looking at things in this inference. So we are still asking people about the assets they have. We are still foregoing some things that are what they consider necessary personal things. There are folks that may own things that are there for a job that they have. So it could be a printer. It could be other assets that are tied to the business. And we've talked before in the HUD 4350.3 that assets tied to a business, we're not looking at those. But again, they did put that into the HOTMA guidance, I think, because of so many folks that are dealing with gig type jobs. So they want to be very specific for it. So when we look at assets, the questions that we ask, the forms, a lot of forms have already been updated by the states, that when they have a required form, there are groups like the National Council of State Housing Agencies, known as NCSHA. They have put out a version of a form. Oftentimes their forms end up getting adopted by the various states to use, but they are going to be asking about those things that are non-necessary personal property to see what we need to do as far as valuing them. So, and then we have some changes with things that we have traditionally looked at as far as an asset, and that has to do with trusts. I will say, if you get a trust, I am probably going to always refer you back to the guidance and go through to see what your situation means. But oftentimes we are not looking at the money provided by the trust. We are looking, or we're not looking at the principal, rather, we may be looking at some of the income coming from the trust, but only in certain situations. So, pardon me.
We've got a few more questions. I also want to make sure we hit all your slides. Do we have time for a couple?
Yeah, we do. We're good.
Okay, so it looks like there might be some need for additional examples of personal property versus necessary property. There was a specific question about whether an EBT was necessary or not. And then the other questions was for seniors who have IRAs that have over 100,000 in them. Do they qualify for housing, or would this amount put them over income? So that's a couple that you might be able to address.
Okay, so those are two. Let's go back to the
Different
first one, because
Okay.
I wanted you to repeat what they.
Yeah, there were two that were somewhat related about necessary and non-necessary.
Right,
The
right.
one was, is an EBT necessary or non-necessary? And then the other question was, give examples again of personal property and necessary personal property.
I'm not getting EBT. So if
Okay,
that's an acronym that somebody's used, if the poster would give some clarity on that so that I can address it properly.
okay, got it. Do you
So
want,
the other thing about the IRA and $100,000. So one thing I'm going to stop here is, if you look at some of the HOTMA guidance, for the HUD properties, there are some caps as far as assets. That does not come into the tax credit program at all. So we still have a situation with tax credits. Somebody could have $1 million of assets and they possibly might still income qualify. On the HUD side, so if I have to follow the HUD rules because I have project-based Section 8, I am going to have caps on assets and I have to determine what I'm going to do for existing residents. And when HOTMA first came out, it was a cap at $100,000 total assets. That also is one of those that's subjected to that annual adjustment factor. So that does not, that IRA does not come into our calculation. Now, here's the other thing about retirement accounts. Retirement accounts, and this is this is huge. So if they are retirement accounts that are recognized by the IRS, if they are not taking routine payments or regular payments, it is not income. It is not considered an asset either. If they are taking routine payments, then we're going to treat that as income. At this point, I would say, because somebody asked a question about an elderly property, I would always be mindful about those folks that are subjected to the required minimum distribution amount, which is, you'll see the acronym RMD. So that number was up adjusted during COVID to the age of 73. So if someone is over the age of 73 and they have one of those retirement accounts, if they had not set up to take routine payments where we're looking at it as far as income, we do have to calculate that RMD, and that would be considered as income, and it's not an asset. I hope that brings some clarity, or at least clears a little bit of the mud.
got
So
it.
Krisann, did the person who put in EBT?
Yeah, they said EBT is like food stamps. And then I'm seeing a lot of things, a lot of other people responding. They've said food stamps, they've said SNAP benefits are placed on EBT cards. The EBT is for TANF.
Okay, for TANF. Okay, so
Okay.
thank you. Because EBT has never been an asset. I think that's what was throwing me. I heard EBT and I immediately thought about welfare benefits. So let me make the food stamps, not income, never have been, never will be. If they are receiving cash assistance, and that cash assistance is known by various names in different states, then that could be income. So TANF, which stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, that is usually a single head of household that has children where they are not receiving child support, or they're not receiving the entire award of child support, and they do have a TANF benefit. That is still income. So that has not changed at all. So I hope that answers their question on that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And food stamps, somebody mentioned SNAP. So the SNAP program, that's food stamps. So again, if that's what I have found as I travel across the country, that different states have different names for their various programs. I was working in one state when I first heard SNAP, and I could not for the life of me at first figure out what the world SNAP benefits were until I did a little bit of digging. I do think our industry specializes in the amount of acronyms that we have. I usually call it lingo bingo, because we throw them around and sometimes we don't even know what they stand for. And sometimes we don't know what they are. So trying to get to actually what the acronym actually is, then figure out if it's something we actually need to be concerned about. So, okay. So let me talk a little bit about trust. Now, this is part of the both in income and assets. So irrevocable trust or revocable trust outside of family or household control is excluded from the definition of family assets. So again, if we have someone with a trust, we need to understand, is it an irrevocable trust or is it a revocable trust that's within the family's control? So we need to understand that as to whether we're going to count it. A revocable trust or a trust under the control of a family or household, any distributions from the trust are excluded from income, except that actual income earned by the trust, regardless of whether it is distributed, shall be considered income to the family at the time it is received by the trust. So again, I will tell you that in my years of working with residents, I very rarely come up against trusts. I'm not sure what all of your experiences are, but I will say it's something that's unusual enough to me that if I were presented with that situation, I'm going to go back to the prevailing guidance. I'm not going to rely on my memory. I'm going to actually go back to the guidance and try to work myself through the steps to understand how I need to treat it and what I need to do with it, whether there's income, whether it would be considered an asset, what I need to do. So, and if I can't do that, then I'm going to seek higher guidance with that. But I will say, trusts have come up just, and this is just, very much of just anecdotal, but I may have seen 5 trusts in 25 years. So that's been my experience. Again, I don't know what your experience is, but it's something that I am talking about it only because it is addressed in the HOTMA guidance, and it is something just to, hey, pay attention to this if this circumstance does present to yourself. So, Krisann, any other questions before I?
Yeah, I'm kind of confused because people are telling, like, they're providing information to each other. Somebody did pipe in and say, somebody said you didn't answer the original question, but I'm not sure what question they were referring to.
I'm practicing to be a politician, don't you know?
Let's see. We have one about, let's see, there's a lot coming in and we probably won't get to all of them, but we'll make sure that we email you. We can look at these after.
Okay.
It says the original, oh, this is the person who said we didn't answer the original question. Cindy said the original question was personal property, comma, necessary property. So I guess, did we get that clear for everyone?
Oh, no, because we ended up getting distracted by another thing.
All the questions, yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard, I think, because this is new. This is something that we've not talked about in this inference. I think in some ways we've always practiced it. So necessary personal property is an example of something that I need to live and to work. So examples of necessary personal property would be clothing. It would be the items that are in my apartment, my furniture. Even I would say, even if I had a huge, big 95,000 inch, I think I just made that up, TV. I'm not going to look at that as that's just going to be part of necessary personal property, and we're not going to put a value to it. So the car that they drive, the jewelry that they wear, and these are things that kind of everyday things. Now, non-necessary is, there's kind of 2 categories with it. So we're still looking at things like checking accounts, savings accounts, life insurance policies, stocks, bonds, those sorts of things are still stuff that we're going to value. That's non-necessary. Now, they also go on to say non-necessary does include some luxury items. So if I own a speedboat, or if I own a car, I have a 67 Mustang Fastback GT that I have in storage, and I take it to car shows in the summer. That's something that has a value to it. That's going to be valued as an asset. But the car that I drive, so my 2014 RAV4 that's out in the parking lot, that's not being considered as an asset. So the other thing that they made very clear with this personal property, necessary versus non-necessary. Necessary personal property also covers things like jewelry that has religious or cultural significance. So if I wear a 14 karat gold cross or a 14 karat gold Star of David, if I wear a wedding ring that's been passed down through my family, that's not going to be considered as an asset, even though it could be very expensive. That's still tied to, I'm wearing it because it's my wedding ring, or I'm wearing it because it is something that has a cultural or religious tie. Now, if I have a 4 karat diamond that I only wear to parties, and I can't imagine, but that's, I'm just trying to use this as an example, then that would be considered non-necessary. Does that help the person who asked the question? Was it Sandy that asked?
Or yeah, Cindy.
Or Cindy, sorry.
And we're at 150, and you have what, 2 more slides to
We
go?
have 2 more slides,
Okay.
and then we can talk about questions. The next couple
Yeah.
of slides won't take a horrible amount of time, but
Okay.
one of the new things to us, it talks about means tested verifications. So what HOTMA allows us to do is identifying that so many folks are part of other programs that are also looking at their income. And so what this provision does is saying that we are allowed to go to them if they've already tested someone's income. So this could be back to your folks that have get food stamps or SNAP benefits, because they have tested their income to make sure that their income falls under their limits for their programs, that we would be allowed to use what information that they've done. Now, obviously, we'd have to put kind of a real reality test to it. Has it been a recent determination of that income? But we are allowed to use stuff like that. In the documents, you'll even see for HOTMA, and you realize HOTMA is written primarily on the HUD program, but we adopt it because of the tax credit program and following that Part 5. It says the tax credit program. So it's allowing us to kind of swap back and forth, if you will. And again, going back to the whole idea for HOTMA was to reduce administrative burden, not only on property managers and owners, but also on our residents. So I know that I have folks that have felt like every time they turn around, someone's asking them to income qualify for something. So this new provision of this means tested verification hopefully will reduce some of that and allow us to streamline some of that. Now, granted, there are probably some owners that will not want to do that they want to do their, or investors, they'll want to do all of their own work or have the owner do all of their own work. That's fine. It's saying it's out there and it can be used. So I think that this is going to be a great thing in the future. I think it's great for not only for us, because it reduces the amount of work that we have to do, but it also, the benefit is for our residents and our applicants. Because I do feel, and actually someone said this at a conference, and it made sense. They said they bought a car, they went online, they answered a couple of questions, and they had a car loan. But think about all the questions sometimes that we ask our residents and our applicants. And some of these folks that are low income, we actually put them through a higher level of standard. It's almost as if we're treating them as if they are lying or as if they are hiding things. So by being able to tap into this means tested, hopefully that will kind of relax some of that. Not that we're not doing our due diligence, and I don't mean, relax on your due diligence, but I am saying, let's be aware of the things that we're putting folks through and the questions that we're asking, and how can we kind of hopefully make all of this kind of come together and be to all of our benefit. So the other thing that happened with this is they talked about a hierarchy of verifications and some new standards. So HUD actually, when they updated the handbook back in 2013, they kind of introduced this whole idea of what they called upfront income verification. And upfront income verification, first glance on the HUD side, is something called EIV, which is the Enterprise Income Verification System. We don't use that for tax credits. We are not supposed to use that. In fact, we could get in trouble if we use that EIV. EIV is a proprietary agreement between HUD, Health and Human Services, and it was actually originally created because of a question about fraud. And when they first implemented EIV, they did catch a lot of fraud. They were paying, HUD was paying subsidies on people in 2 different locations, whether that was identity theft, or we had people that decided to live part of the year in one part of the country and another part of the year in another part of the country, or people just trying to get by. They found that they were paying subsidy on people that had passed away. So there were definite needs for that EIV system. It's now, I will say that on the HUD side, it's a great convenience. There's a lot of stuff that they can use, which will simplify the verifications. However, we can't use that on the tax credit side. But we do have other things that are what are considered upfront income verifications. So now what it's saying is that we have, in essence, full permission to go to entities like the Work Number, or there are several of those companies now that have popped up that are doing that have payroll information on applicants or residents. And it's saying that's fine. That's actually the first place that you want to go for that. Now, at this point, I will stop because there are a couple of states that will not allow you to use the Work Number. They have their reasons for that. So again, even though I'm talking about the federal standards, you do have to be aware of what's in your state, where your property is located, and what their standards are. And if they have said, please don't use this, then don't use that. They are the ones that monitor compliance. So you do have to abide by what they have said. But this also lets us talk about web-based stuff. So I know that there was a, as we're moving forward with technology, folks have apps on their phone that can create reports. This is kind of, in essence, blessing this and saying, this is fine. Instead of going directly to that third party and hoping that they will and waiting on them to give a third party verification, that these are considered third party. So when they can get their bank statements, and we'll talk a little bit about bank statements too, with some changes that are coming up with checking accounts that I think is pretty cool. But things like pay stubs. So this is going to be a lot easier. So we're going to go to that upfront before we try to go to a third party. Third party is actually, if you look on the slide down, it's third on the list now. So we are also, really going to try to embrace anything that tenants can provide us. Obviously, we're going to run them through a litmus test. Is it legitimate? I unfortunately have seen some pay stubs that I think were actually created falsely, but still, under most circumstances, we're going to allow that, and that's going to be just fine for the purposes that we need to do. Next one is written or third-party verification directly from the income source. So here's the big shift. It used to be that was the first thing. So we had to, even though we knew that that employer was not going to give you a third-party verification, we still had to send a form to them and have them tell us, no, we won't give it to you. So we don't have to do that anymore. So that's great. We can save a lot of time and hopefully get folks qualified a lot more easily than before. Then you'll see down the line, oral third-party verification, and then kind of the, if all else fails, self-certification. So this would be something that the resident or the applicant would be telling us. That's going to be last on the list. That's going to be after we've tried to explore all the other options first. But again, upfront income verification now is first and foremost how we're going to go, and then follow through that hierarchy. So one of the things that I did, and I don't have this on a slide, but I wanted to talk about what verifications are. So when HOTMA goes into effect, what HOTMA said is if someone is employed, no longer are we looking at 4 to 6 pay stubs, that we can rely on just 2. And I realize somebody on the webinar probably just passed out. So let's let them have a second to come to. Now, it doesn't say that you have to only collect 2. It just says that you can collect 2. I will say, in talking to people all over the country, I think most people are probably going to want a larger sample size than just 2 pay stubs, but that is in there. Here's the thing that I think is awesome. HOTMA says that if I have a checking account, I only need 1 bank statement. No longer will I have to do that 6-month average on a checking account. So some of the other things that I know that we won't have time to get to, that we may have to do a part 2, there are some things about how we calculate assets, how we calculate income from assets. Rules have changed as far as imputed assets. And so that is, unfortunately, we're going to have to save that for another time, but it definitely is something that is part of HOTMA. But I will say definitely take a look at what's going on in your state. Take a look at what they're doing as far as when they're implementing HOTMA. There are some states that implemented it back on January 1st of 2024. There are some states that will put it into effect January 1st of 2025. There are others that are now saying they're going to delay until what HUD has said is their new implementation date of July 1st. So stay tuned to your state to understand when you need to fully implement, if you're allowed to implement now, but with clarification records. So.
Okay, we are at time, but if you can stay, stay. I'm assuming that Christine's okay with that. I just want to do a quick announcement on the next slide.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So this is important to remember, Grace Hill offers tax credit courses. So we have the information that we have shared over the last few months is that we have been updating our tax credit basics to have the new information from the HOTMA rules. And so those updates have all been done. And so now your teams have access to the most current information to keep you in compliance. In order to ensure a smooth transition to these courses, if you don't have our elective series, you can contact your customer success manager to find out more about that and how to get that elective. If you already have it, there's a few things you need to do. There is a link to the list of the courses that are available, and I'm gonna copy this real quick. I'm gonna give you also, let me hop back over here. So if you scan that QR code in there, that'll take you to the directory of the courses. And then I've also dropped in the chat a link to the course replacement guide. So these are for existing customers, existing Grace Hill customers who have these courses. If you are an admin and you're on this call, you're going to want to unassign the related courses in the learning path assignments before the end of the year. Generate completion records for all of the LIHTC courses to avoid error messages on the learner transcripts. And then you're going to look at the new courses and assign those if you haven't already done that, and just complete all of that by the end of the year to avoid any interruptions. And the link to the course replacement guide is in the chat. And we've also emailed this out as well. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your customer success manager. Now, we still have quite a few people on, and so I'm going to try to take a few minutes to go back to the chat and see what else we can pick up on this. And I don't know if, let's see, there's quite a bit going on in here. Let's see, did we talk about a car? Oh, somebody's family, a resident, their family gifted them a car that is valued at more than $100,000. Would this fall under an I love you gift?
Wow. I don't think so. I mean, that's wow. That's a great question. I would actually probably have to go to HUD and ask them about that. I think that's a little bit extreme. I can't imagine somebody giving someone $100,000 car.
I want to join that family.
I was just thinking that. I
Can I be a part of that family?
Wow.
Okay. So yeah, that one sounds tricky too. I am not, and I will say this too. I have so much respect for all of you who work in this vertical, because you have to know so much more than I'm a traditional property management person who've worked in garden style communities and at market rate apartments for many years, but this is a lot of information. And so I'm just continually impressed by all that you have to know. But to me, this does sound a little bit tricky as well as to whether or not that would be counted.
Wow, I would definitely, that is definitely something that I would get higher opinions. I would talk with folks at your state. I would talk to HUD about that. I, it, part of me says, yes, value it just to be on the safe side. And then again, it's at that point then, because if assets are over, so now so I talked about there not being an asset cap saying you can't qualify for housing. There definitely is one of those on the HUD side. And it started out with HOTMA being $100,000. Now it's up over 100,000 because that's one of those things that is subject to the annual adjustment factors. One of the things that HOTMA came out with was the amount that we can self-certify assets. And that started out at 50,000. Now it's at $51,060, I believe, is the 2025 amount. Now, I'll stop here and say that that's what HUD says, and a lot of states are going for that because it's part of the HOTMA and now the HUD guidance. There are some states that are saying that is not a good thing or not something to abide by because they are holding tight back to the IRS issuing years ago the ruling saying that folks could self-certify if their assets were $5,000 or less, and saying that is going to stick, and it would not, we would not be able to use the under, well, I'm going to call it 50,000 just because 50,000 rolls off the tongue a lot better than $51,600. We haven't heard from the IRS on that. Sometimes we don't want to ask the IRS questions because of the answers that we may receive from them. But there are some different things as far as if we impute and if we don't. What's gone away is the imputing if their total assets are over XYZ, saying imputing on the entire amount of assets. The only time we would ever be imputing on an asset is if their assets were over that now 51,000 mark, $51,060 mark, and it was an asset that we did not have an interest rate or a dividend. So let me use that $100,000 car, and I'd like to see that happen. But anyway, because that car itself is not, it's not an investment, it's not earning interest. We would be imputing at the current HUD passbook rate an annual amount for that based on the value of that vehicle. So it's a little bit more tricky. Again, I think once HUD finally says HOTMA is in full-fledged, all the software providers have been working on all the mechanics that they need to do to make their software work, that will know when we have to do something or demand an answer for something. But until then, there are many states that are just, again, following what we've always done. There are some states that have gone on with the HOTMA stuff. So I would say definitely if you have questions about assets and whether especially now until at least July 1st, when we are told that that is the effective date for HUD to fully implement HOTMA. In the meantime, go to your state, look for state guidance on things. If not, then seek higher information, either from an industry expert, from someone in your company to figure out what you need to do. But again, the software companies are all waiting, and they're waiting for HUD to kind of finally wave that wand to say, hey, we're going for this, before they can fully implement the changes that HOTMA is bringing.
Got it. Well, there's something open in the question, but it's not a question. It just says, I think that people inherit assets. That's all it says. So I don't know if somebody thought they were maybe answering somebody else's question. Um, so
And people do inherit assets.
yeah,
So, so, you know, depending on where you are with your certification process, you may be addressing it. So if it's a brand new move-in and that's something that they've already inherited, you're going to see that in their story as far as the information they disclose to you. If it's somebody that already is a resident and they inherit assets, it may never even come up in conversation if I don't have to ever, you know, verify their income again, if I only have to rely on self-certification. So, but
okay.
you are right. I mean, people do inherit things at different times. So,
Okay. We are past time. I will tell you that somebody in the chat has said where do I find the HOTMA guidelines for further? So there's a couple of different things, and I will tell you, you can go to HUD.gov, but I, not being a person who has ever worked on a tax credit property in my life, I have taken the courses that Christine and the team at Grace Hill created, and I found them to be very easy to understand and follow. It's complicated information, but we have learning experts that partnered with Christine to create this material. So your best bet is to sign up for this elective. If you're working for a company and you don't have this elective, reach out to the leaders at your company and tell them you want these courses, because this is what's going to keep you in compliance. And then your answer to the recording for the webinar, that will be sent out to all registrants later on this week. So you'll get those as well. And the question about, are they an additional cost? That's for the elective, I'm assuming. Yes, but it's not much more, and it's certainly worth it to have all of the knowledge right there at your hands, and to ensure that you know everything. Do these courses count as CEC for CAM and CAPS? They do not. I apologize for that, but I hope that you found this valuable. Okay. Let's see what else. Are the changes to the compliance manual posted on the admin page? I don't know that I know what that means. I don't know if they're thinking about the policy manual that Grace Hill has. I'm not sure how to answer that question. Oh, the policy manual. The manual has been updated. It's the updates are in there live with the new HOTMA rules. This is based on the HOTMA changes, and Christine's her next step for us is to review that manual. We wanted to get these courses finished. And so she's going to review it just to put her stamp of approval on it. And so we'll let you know once that takes place. So, so stay tuned. We are excited to be able to support everyone. And just like I said, if you have any other questions, reach out. I can make sure we get those over to Christine. And thank you so much for being with us.
and one thing I'll say, if you attended this webinar and things are overwhelming, I have been there, I am there. It is big. This is changes. I joked with the team when we were redoing the tax credit coursework that if we had that Men in Black neuralizer pen, it might be easier because we would all be starting, you know, fresh and new, and we wouldn't have to say, but this is how we did it. It's something that it will become very familiar. It will make sense. A lot of it does make sense. And if I keep going back, what saves me is I keep going back. This whole idea is that this was supposed to be a savings or a reduction in process, if you will, for us and also for our residents. And I am embracing it. I mean, it's just, I wish it would go into effect tomorrow, but we are kind of all in that holding pattern. So again, I keep saying, go back to your state, see when your state is implementing it, and then, you know, and ask questions. I mean, that's how we all learn, is by asking questions. We're not all given perfect knowledge ever. So.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. You are a wealth of knowledge, and Yes, you will be able to have the video content because we will be emailing you the recording for the call. So everybody, thank you so much. Go on about, have a great rest of your day, and have a wonderful holiday season. Thanks, everyone.